So I appreciate everybody being here for our Parts Quality Program webinar today. Strict VP of Sales here at Paragon. I'm also joined by Dave Mueller, VP of Strategic Programs. Pat Long from Southern Nuclear, she's a Fleet Supply Chain Manager, and Laurie McGuire from Energy Harbor, who's the Fleet Procurement Engineering Manager. Both of them were the leads in implementing their parts quality programs. So we're glad you both could join us today and offer some input. So just some quick housekeeping notes. Everybody's going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but please use the QA button or the chat feature to ask any questions during the webinar. Anything that pops up, we'll make sure that we get those questions all answered and or any comments you have. And also, as always, the webinars will be recorded and be sent out afterwards once we're all done. So go over an agenda here for today. So I'll go over a quick Paragon introduction for anybody that's not quite as familiar with Paragon. And then we'll get into the actual webinar where we'll be defining what parts quality program really is. Why and when you would implement a parts quality program, and what good looks like as far as a parts quality program, and then get into the how a good implementation would work. And then, as I mentioned, we've got Pat and Laurie here from Southern and Energy Harbor. So we'll just give them some time to go through just some comments on their implementation and kind of the status of that, and then roll into questions. So who's Paragon? We're the largest non-OEM nuclear-focused business in the U.S. If you look over to the right here, you'll see our main areas of expertise are in commercial grade dedication, equipment qualification, INC repair and reverse engineering, custom design, and alternate sourcing. Aside from that, we've got some really good, experienced industry professionals, as Dave is here with us today and obviously works for Paragon. To go over our parts quality program and our program, but implementing one. But Paragon's got over 180 employees located here in Texas. We were created out of ATC Nuclear in 2017, and then acquired Nuclear Logistics about a year ago in February of 2020. Our QA program is audited by NUPIC, NIAC, DOD, and the DOE. And we've got an ASME Section 3 program with all of our N stamp, NPT, NS, and NR stamps. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave Mueller. So Dave started with his career with Sergeant Lundy in 1981, working on construction and completion of the Byron, Braidwood, LaSalle, and Clinton stations. And then in 1989, Dave transitioned to the supply world, which included a 20-year stint at Exelon, where he served as site supply chain manager at Braidwood, and then transitioned to corporate Exelon supply chain, where he served as inventory manager, helping develop the contingent reservation process. Then he went into corporate supply operations manager, where he helped implement the Exelon critical spare process, as well as the parts quality initiative for Exelon. He was a member of the equipment reliability working group and worked through INPO on establishing supplies PO and Cs. Dave's now been with Paragon for 6 years, where he continues to focus his passion in helping improve supply chain's role and image to the industry. So Dave, welcome. Appreciate you being here and going over everything today.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thank you all for attending this meeting. So first off, I hope everybody is safe and warm, even our friends down south. So I got about 2.5 feet of snow in my backyard. So hopefully you're safe. So we're going to talk about parts quality. So what is parts quality? If your site leadership would put it simply, I want every part I put in the plan to be perfect. And while he or she might smile and follow up with a comment, at least make sure that the parts I put in my critical components are perfect. And while assuring that every single part is perfect is not only very costly, but surely not achievable, a good parts quality process focuses on just those, the ones that make it a bad day at the plant. Next slide. When I was with Exelon back in 2006, I was part of a small group that was charged to find a way to immediately fix these parts related issues. In the end, we developed what we called PQI, or the Parts Quality Initiative. And the process demonstrated results and drove the parts related capacity factor losses from 43% to 6%. As a result, and I might add, after I left Exelon, PQI was named the 2018 NEI Tip Award winner. So it was fun to be part of that. So is parts quality still an issue today? Is the industry still experiencing bad days at the plant because of parts? And I don't have to tell you that this gets tracked and measured obviously by your station, but also INPO and the regulator. So the latest INPO data suggests that material issues are still impacting plant performance. And remember, this graph here is only measuring those bad days, the scrams and down powers. What might be surprising looking at the numbers is that the issue has not gotten better or worse over years. When we look at the issue in terms of generation loss, basically hurting us where it counts, you can see that the average is actually increased in 2020. As a result, the nuclear leaders have identified parts quality impacts to generation as a focus area in 2021. One of the things I've learned in my now 40 years in the industry is when the CNOs decide to address and fix something, they tend to be successful. So one can help with the solution or be given the corrective action. I have always liked to be part of the solution on something that would eventually fall in my lap. So today, not all utilities are addressing parts quality. Later, we will hear from 2 utilities, Southern and Energy Harbor, that have recently implemented a parts quality program. As you can imagine, it is not that simple. To go from an average of 35 to 105,000 stock codes and find the ones that you can actually, that can actually make it a bad day is really the key. I have heard it said over my years, it is like looking for a needle in a haystack. I just don't know where to start. And yes, the goal is to identify the accurate population of parts to test. Screening down the 35 to 105,000 different stock codes and find the ones that can impact plant performance is obviously the key. But let's hold that thought, because a truly successful parts quality process is much more. You need buy-in from site, leadership, corporate budget stakeholders, and your plant senior leadership needs to understand that the parts quality process is not a procurement process, but an integral part of the equipment reliability process. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen over the years in utilities implementing any type of parts quality process is that it stays within the site supply organization. Those supply organizations have tried to do it on their own seem to come up short, or at least lack full implementation. As most of you know, most or all successful plant programs and efforts are driven from the top. Corrective action programs. While identifying the correct stock codes is truly the key to success, but just as important is understanding the events and to make sure that as much as possible, that cause, event, and failure analysis is accurate. One of the major positive steps that we recommend for all manufacturing related events is that supply receives an action to evaluate what we call the appropriate or applicable action. During my time at Exelon pre-PQI, many lower level events never made it up to supply. Missing or inaccurate trend data can result in missed opportunities. As they say, the devil is in the detail, but once trending is accurate, or at least better, you can start to focus on those largest contributors. Supplier performance. Good supplier performance is important from 2 sides. We all want our suppliers to learn from mistakes and errors and avoid repeatable events. So communication on all events is important to get back to the supplier. When I was with Exelon and went on numerous supplier performance reviews, I always said to the supplier, You should not want to improve for me, but for the profitability of your company. The better you perform is a direct link to a better bottom line for you. And then operating experience. One element that gets overlooked is the wealth of data in OPEX, the Info Iris site, and other various places. It is normal to review OPEX when performing a cause event, but it is extremely important to take advantage of this vast industry data and look proactively when considering your target parts items to test. While it might not have been an issue at your plant, it could be an industry problem, and many times the corrective action is already contained in the OPEX. Continuous learning. As with any established process, it is important to review how effective it really is. For example, if you've seen no failures on a particular component, it might be okay to remove it from the parts quality list. And then performance indicators. I've always liked to use Peter Drucker's quote, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. As an industry, we have improved because of the many, mostly valuable metrics. It is just important to measure how you are doing on parts issues. Next slide. So this wheel here shows the basic parts process. Obviously, the first step is the identification of the testing population. Finding the right stock code candidates, scanning over your 105,000 stock codes, and truly finding those items that have a history of issues, both internal and external, as we talked about. And there is a wealth of data out there that can help you identify your population. Parts receipts and commercial receipt. So this step, it gets overlooked many times in my years of reviewing various different utility parts programs. It is important that supply, the folks in the warehouse, receipt inspectors clearly understand not only what a parts quality item is in receiving, but what to do with it. I have seen parts quality efforts fail because folks in the warehouse are unclear or have not been properly trained on what to do. Third-party testing. The next question is, who will perform the testing? Obviously, it must be someone with expertise in that particular component, and it should include a formal test template with documented test results. We have recommended utilizing Exelon Power Labs, for they have performed thousands of tests and have already have hundreds of test procedures. Exelon, since 2006, in their PQI process, have used Exelon Power Labs. So they have a wealth of established test templates. For those going it alone or keeping it internal, just be forewarned that suppliers will review and challenge test failures. Whoever performs your testing, it is critical that test templates and results are properly documented for future potential use and trending. Corrective actions. An effective parts quality process will ensure that lessons learned and trends are captured. This could lead to additional requirements on future orders. One big example for the industry was the high number of circuit board failures the industry saw about 10 years ago. Now, almost all utilities require some form of burn-in testing prior to shipping. In my experience with parts quality, I've seen many such corrective actions placed on a supplier, some short-term as well as permanent. And that's the beauty of the parts quality. You can see these trends, talk to the supplier, and put an additional step or requirement in there to assure quality. Next step, slide. So the steps for implementing. Obviously, identification of the population is important. Basically, you have those items, but then, what do I test first? Obviously, you can't test every single part. If you have 700-800 items, you're not going to test all those. So this is a big first step decision. Most stations starting out focus on current inventory and upcoming work, and those parts soon to be installed. This also can provide some quick success stories. If you have a test failure that is scheduled for March or April, it goes over well with station leadership. And sharing success stories is a really important element in a parts quality process. Remember, if you find a test failure it doesn't become a bad day, so it doesn't become noticeable. And what we found at Exelon is, silence is not always a good thing. We're not hearing any bad news. Well, we're catching these things before you put them in the plant. So it's really important to share those success stories. So focusing on daily, upcoming outage, looking at your critical spares, single point vulnerability, really coming up with a priority list of which items you're going to attack first. The next step, obviously, is procedures. Creating a parts quality procedure, as well as making sure that it aligns with your existing station procedures, is really a requirement. And we're going to talk about procedures here in a minute. Roll out the process, the change management. As with any process, effective change management is always needed. And making sure that the entire station, engineering, supply, warehouse, buyers, they all know their role into the parts quality process and they understand it. And then development of metrics and KPIs. As they say, you get better on things you measure. Same thing here, having effective metrics. Next slide. As I stated earlier, an effective parts quality process is a station commitment and not just a supply initiative. And that's really important. So a lot of procedures will be changed. Obviously, the new parts quality procedure, and we have actually created procedures for the clients that we've helped implement. We create that procedure, but also you'll revise or update your corrective action procedures. It could be your root cause or ACE or other actions. So that parts quality is part of that process. If you have a root cause on a bad part, how does that impact the potential future order of that part? So it has to be part of the process. Stock code creation. So once you do identify your list today, obviously at each site, you create new stock codes, maybe daily, maybe weekly. New stock codes are created. So the person creating the stock code has to know, should this be part of the PQI? And part of the process and change management will be to help make sure that new CAD IDs or stock codes are flagged. We talked about warehousing, QC inspectors, that they know their role. One of the things we did when we helped implement at other utilities is we actually sat down with the warehouse folks and the QC inspectors and look for their input, because we want to flag the stock code, but what's the best way? And the people doing the work every day are certainly the experts on that. And so we talked to those folks and they helped us find the most appropriate place. The one thing we didn't want to do is do it in a silo and they come back and say, well, after we decide where to put it, and they say, well, that was stupid. Why didn't you put it here? And so we worked on that. Your shelf life in storage maintenance procedures or process will be touched, and then equipment reliability procedures will also be touched. These could be minimal updates, but just so they reference parts quality. And then your supplier performance process, if there are bad trends, make sure that's part of the supplier performance and the importance of getting it back to the supplier. Next slide. So the benefits of doing a parts quality process. While many stations start out with current inventory, the long-term goal is that the process will be captured during the receipt process. This can be actually a cost savings effort, as you can return the failed part, because most times it is before the invoice is approved and it's part of your receipt. And then the best part is you have documentation on why it failed. And this provides actually a cost savings if it's done during the receipt process. Identification of failures can help reduce expediting. One of the metrics we like to help establish is monitoring expediting cost. And as you know, many bench tests are performed just prior to installation. And if it fails bench testing, supply at times needs to expedite a replacement component to support the work schedule. So that gets measured, and hopefully with a successful parts quality test upfront, you can avoid the bench test or last minute issues. Trends of bad suppliers. So as a supplier now, wearing the supplier hat, I hate to use the word bad supplier, but I like to think of it as identifying those suppliers that need more attention. Like I said, all suppliers want to give you a good part and avoid issues. That's good for the bottom line. So they should welcome these comments and issues and look to improve performance. During my years at Exelon, I found very few suppliers push back when you show them the facts and you tell them we're here to help you improve. If they do not, it's probably time to find a new supplier. And then again, just a word on testing templates. So as you can imagine, as you come up with your population of components, the need to develop robust and solid test templates. When we implemented Exelon, sometimes it took a couple of revisions, actually working with suppliers to develop a quality test template. And so that's a lot of work if you're going to do that internally. So again, utilizing Exelon Power Labs for the already established templates will no doubt save time and money. And then operating experience and failure analysis, the key is to have make sure that supply is engaged, they challenge the failure analysis and make sure that things get properly. So now we want to, invite Pat Long, who was the lead on implementing Southern's project in 2019. And I just asked her to share a few words of wisdom on her learning experience. Pat, welcome.
Thank you, David. Essentially, Southern Nuclear decided after, and to Dave's point, is it's a little bit easier implementation when your new CNO is a fan of parts quality, of the parts quality initiative. So in October of 2019, we embarked on the implementation of this program with the help, of course, of Paragon. We had Dave Mueller as well as Pat Murray that came in and helped us develop our PQI list of components, which comprised of about 800 item masters or CAT IDs per site. Essentially, those particular parts were, again, reiterating what David talked about earlier, were SPVs as well as items that were in ISIS reports, critical work orders, things like that. And so at the same time, we recognize that because, and if you could go to the next slide, from a business standpoint, our business drivers was that we recognized in the years, between 14 and 19, that we had experienced 25 downpowers of trip or scrams related to parts failures, which equated to about $25.7 million in replacement power costs over 5 years. That is a huge impact to a business. And so, next slide. So again, we decided to implement this program. And as I talked about, Paragon was assisted us in implementation with, and we, because of their efforts as well as ours, we were able to implement our program in about 9 weeks. It was a lot of work, but a great partnership between Paragon and SNC to make that happen. Next slide. So to date, last year, our PQI scope was primarily the list that was created was prioritized from really high is high, moderate, and low. And so last year, SNC committed to test the highs and the moderates at all 3 of their operating sites. For Farley, we tested 656 individual parts. We had 5 consequential failures, 1 which would have resulted in a reactor scram, 3 MSPI failures, 1 down power. And when it's showing 2 engineering evaluations pending, Essentially what we did is once there was a part failure, we ran that back through engineering to determine what was the exact failure or potential consequential failure. At Hatch, we tested 196 individual parts. We had 4 failures. 2 would have resulted in reactor scrams, 1 MSPI, and 1 maintenance rule functional failures. We have 5 at the time, about 5 engineering evals that's pending. I'm stand corrected. We've got 1 engineering eval that was completed, and that one resulted in an MSPI failure. In Vogel, we had 8 failures, 7 reactor scrams, and 1 MSPI, and we're still waiting for 5 engineering evals. Next slide. On top of that, the sites were I'm getting ahead of myself. These are kind of a high level of what type of failures we were seeing and what systems. You also will notice the safety class of some of these parts that are safety related. We would expect that our safety related suppliers would not be in this on this list, but again, they are. And so what we're doing is making sure that they are becoming or will be notified by utilizing our nuclear oversight department. That information will be fed into their audit or NUPIC audit documentation. As well as we are now we've asked engineering to perform a Part 21 evaluation for those suppliers as well. Next slide. Again, this is a continuation of Vogel's failures. Again, you can see the systems and the component descriptions and the safety classes. Next slide. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody.
Next, we have Laurie McGuire from Energy Harbor, and they completed their PQI in 2020. So welcome, Laurie.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. And we did implement at the end of 2020, and I, of course, that long was indispensable to us in determining how we would move forward. We also chose to use Paragon. Dave and Pat Murray were indispensable at making this, I'll call it a seamless transition to the PQI program. They made it very easy for me. I have 3 sites that I manage, and I have 1 procurement engineer as our new model as of late this year when we became Energy Harbor at each site, with 2 at the 2-unit site at Beaver Valley. So limited on resource. We were having scrams. 2 of our units had scrams in 2019 due to believed parts quality issues. And as a result, at Perry in particular, which is my home plant, we had a IMPO AFI, and I was defenseless to say whether it was parts quality or not. So that kind of was the watershed event that said we need to do parts quality, so that not only do we need to be aggressive in understanding, doing failure analysis and understanding if it was a parts quality program, so that if it's a valid parts quality hit, that we are trending it, taking it, and addressing it. But if it's not a parts quality program, that it's not just the easy place to label it when we don't know what else to label it as a site. So there was some lessons learned there. So yes, we implemented towards the end of the year, which means Pat went through, we uploaded mountains of years, 10 years worth of work history and a CR history and data that we had to Pat, and he assimilated all of that. He handed me back a list. In our case, a little different than Southern, we had 4,938 material IDs, but we have, with 4 units, but that's just how it worked out with our Beaver Valley unit had about half of those with 2 units. So we had about that many that were, when we looked at the Exelon PQI standard inclusion list. So yes, it was identified what the scope would be by the end of 2020. But we're in the process now, these first 3 months, of flagging all of this, our material IDs, as parts quality. We have 1 unit, Davis Bessie, that's complete with that, and we have 850 line items that they're moving to quarantine to make sure we control that inventory and it doesn't get released, and that we look out ahead at T12 and criticality and get them off to Exelon for testing. We're also using Exelon Power Labs, and I can tell you from that I just got it last week. That the watershed event that drove the IMPO AFI due to parts quality that drove the change to this program turned out not to be a parts quality event. However, we didn't know that. And our VP, very much a supporter of, we need to take the next step. The industry's taking the next step. We're becoming Energy Harbor, and we need better reliability. We need to be competitive. So we are implementing parts quality, and I can't tell you how much that backing helped with aligning the organization, the change management, the funding, the support to get, I'll say, a quick turnaround, 3 months, in identification of what needed flagged, and get the organization on board to getting the inventory quarantine sent out for testing as needed, and also for increasing or upgrading our procurement packages to include parts quality testing. So, kind of some lessons learned there. Again, very, very crucial that the VP CNO are backing that parts quality needs to occur, because I can tell you from meetings that have happened already this year, now that we've implemented, of course, there's a lot of angst. There's, a lot of questions. Why are we doing this? Why can't we do it ourselves, et cetera, as part of the learning acceptance process. And the VP was in those meetings and said, we don't have the resource to do it ourselves. This is what the industry is doing. We can't afford these scrams. We are implementing this. And that just clears the path for a smooth implementation to get to the next step in equipment reliability. So, some of the things that attracted me to use Paragon and Exelon Power Labs was their Pat's wealth of experience in ops, in corrective action program, knowing the parts, the titles, the descriptions, the type of part, and using the Exelon Power Labs with the list that's already created, what's included, what's excluded, and having a whole community of people that we, probably like a users group once a year, we would meet to say, what parts do we need to add based on OE or vendor performance or history of, LCOs or scrams, and which ones can we take off because they're really performing well or better. So, that, and having templates that we all use that are tested the same. So we are apples to apples comparing to what the industry is seeing as true failures, and that we're not creating I'll say our own homegrown template that then is, again, working with vendors or talking to vendors about, I tested it, it failed, and, you need to take warranty back. Well, if you have hey, this is a known organization with tried and true templates for testing, makes the path easier, I think, probably to get the warranty returns, because they've heard about PQI, they know Exelon's doing it, and they know the parts, likely, if they're good vendors, and they'll know, yeah, those are more vulnerable parts, we understand, send it back, we'll validate the failure, and then we'll do warranty. And we had I would say benefits of the program. I implemented at Davis-Besse. So again, 3 units, Davis-Besse, Perry, and Beaver Valley. Davis-Besse, I'll call planted the flag on January 11th. I had all the stock or the material IDs flagged. We had quarantined or marked everything for quarantine. We were only releasing the quarantined inventory to non-critical, non-LCO type applications to deplete some of that inventory. And we were sending material out for testing for the upcoming T+12 cycle. And we had our first failure last week. So of course, that's getting quite a bit of advertisement. I'll be writing the CR today, condition report. And, so right away, January 11th, this is barely a month later, we've had our first failure that prevented a 72-hour LCO had it been installed. So already proving the value of getting us to the next step for equipment reliability. So, and especially with, I talked to our engineering folks, and there's a push to extend PMs, to defer them. This will increase the integrity or the reliability of our supply, so that if there's competing objectives with either less PMs, preventative maintenance being done, or even not doing the maintenance or run to failure approach, which we're challenging right now with, if we have an LCO part fail. We had 2 of these last week where LCO parts failed, and we were in a crisis because we had them quarantined to go out for testing, but they were not in the T12 schedule. And we have not got, completely, meaning all the inventory reconciled that will be PQI and get it tested. And so we started probing at why, and they said, well, we're starting to extend a lot of these preventative maintenance frequencies. And I said, well, that is just not logical, because I'm trying to prevent the failure and you're letting it happen. So that promoted more discussion on, what's our standard, what are we doing, and then flagging that we can't be doing that for LCO parts. So, so it's created a lot of good discussion, a lot of alignment across the sites. I think, other lessons learned, I way underestimated how much it takes to get the procedure implemented. And it would have been helpful if I had done that as a priority kind of upfront. So the rest of the organization understood what the program was, and they'd been briefed, but different than here's the procedure to follow. So we were focusing on getting the parts quarantined because we have an outage starting in March, then another one in April. So we were prioritizing getting the parts out as the priority. And I should have put a little more emphasis on getting the procedure out also. I needed more help. I ended up getting 3 administrative, I'll say technical, administrative kind of folks that I needed to bring on board to help get all the parts flagged. I naively thought I could flag 4,900 parts myself, and that wasn't going well. So, so I got 3 people to help with that, got it done, within 3 months, we'll have it done. And so that was indispensable. Of course, VP support indispensable. And the one site, Davis Bessie, they implemented within a month of the list being identified, parts flagged. They have everything quarantined, over 800 line items, like I said, at one site, quarantined, and they are tightly controlling anything that gets released. If it would be returned and was not tested, it'll get flagged. If it needs to go out for testing, of course, they're managing that. So the teamwork in supply chain between the leadership, the warehouse supervisor, the analyst that's looking ahead at the work schedule, all of that was crucial to our success. And that particular plan is out in front of our other 2 as far as more of a seamless transfer, more wide acceptance of parts quality, what it is, why it's important, what we're doing, advertising the failure, et cetera, that we had. So supply chain teamwork is essential in implementing this program effectively, but couldn't have done it without excellent Power Labs and Pat Murray. They really helped me get it done in an efficient manner and to consistent standards the industry is using, so that we can mitigate and not take IMPO AFIs when we don't need to, but more importantly, that we have better reliability, because it's really important as a new energy harbor utility that has to be competitive, that we are preventing scrams and failures. So that's all I got.
Well, thank you, Laurie. Appreciate that. Appreciate all the information from you and Pat, lessons learned, results. I know, things are still kind of getting off the ground, but you're making a lot of headway and a lot of progress. So, I appreciate you sharing all that information with everybody on the call today. And, Dave, you can go through some takeaways, and then we'll go into questions for, us here at Paragon to Laurie or Pat. Feel free we'll open it up here to questions.
Yeah. So to, just wrap up a little bit, as I mentioned, the CNOs have made parts quality focus area in 2021. So, for those utilities doing really nothing, you really should be doing something. We talked about a couple ways to go at it. So the main takeaway, if you're looking to develop or improve your parts quality, obviously station buy-in, plant leadership commitment, as Laurie mentioned, the site VP, I remember their VPs were part of our kickoff meeting, which was pretty impressive that, a site VP would take time out for that type of call. So that commitment, the accurate list of items. You don't want to test too much, and you don't want to test too few. So making sure that the population meets your expectations, and that's really obviously the devil in the detail. Solid testing templates. As you can imagine, you're going to have many different type components. So testing to a solid template that a supplier on a failure will be able to acknowledge and not say, well, you didn't test to proper standards. Change management, make sure the entire site organization, corporate or site, is bought in, and that they understand their role in the process. And we talked about procedures and the need for that. Continuous learning. Just because you developed the list today, as Laurie and Pat mentioned, we started out with a list, but as you add new stock codes, you need to make sure that those new items get added, and then the ones that don't present a problem, to remove those. And then really important, celebrate and communicate success. As I mentioned, if you do a testing and you find a failure, the only one who's going to know about that is the supply organization, and it doesn't get caught on a bad day or Friday night. And so it's important to, as Laurie mentioned, celebrate and communicate that, hey, we avoided this 72-hour LCO, and we avoided this issue here. And that just adds credibility to the program. Those are the main takeaways, and we'll open it up for, I don't know if there's any questions. We have probably a couple minutes for some questions.
Okay, we've got one here from Carlos, 2 inquiries. First one, can Paragon support sites from the very beginning, meaning to revise or create a site critical spare parts list? Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, so critical spares is a little bit different than parts quality, but obviously the two kind of go hand in hand. As I mentioned, when I was at Exelon, I actually helped develop the critical spare process at Exelon, and I've been asked to review and comment as suggestions on various different station critical spare programs. So I would welcome the opportunity to review where you are, any on the call, where your critical spare process is, and I can provide comments and suggestions. If you're starting from scratch, I would welcome that opportunity to help. I'm familiar with the EPRI guidelines on critical spare, and we've been contacted by another station that is going to have us help us develop their critical spare program. Hasn't been awarded yet, so I can't mention it, but we would certainly welcome that. And then from beginning, the parts quality process, we've worked with 4 utilities, Energy Harbor and Southern, both on a call they've implemented, and we're working with 2 others. And yes, starting from scratch. One of the things I will add is, the great cooperation we got from Pat and Laurie. Obviously, we're asking a lot of questions and asking for a lot of data, and both Laurie and Pat were exceptional. And I'm not just saying that because they're on the call, but as a point of contact and, getting us what we needed to help really define that population, made our jobs really easy. So hopefully that answers your question, Carlos.
Yep, part 2, Carlos. I see you'd like a copy of the presentation. Absolutely. I'll also get a copy of the presentation out after this to everybody on the call. So absolutely. One more, or 2 more, I should say. The next one from Sean. I've heard it said that in order to be successful, it's important for a PQ initiative to be owned across multiple functional lines and is not just a supply chain initiative. If you agree, can you please expand on this concept? That's a good one for you, Dave.
Yeah, so I touched on that. And I've seen over the years other utilities go at it, and where it's been a supply driven initiative, and it fails to a point. And having maintenance part of the process, engineering plays a key role. Laurie mentioned and Pat mentioned the engineering evaluations on the failures. So engineering has to be bought in. It's really a site program. So when you implement it, I can't emphasize this enough that, it's not a supply initiative. It's a station, process. And that's why the entire organization has to be bought in, from your corrective action to your engineering, to maintenance. If you have component experts, obviously they play a key role. It's really an entire plant process, and really, if you want success, that's where it has to begin.
Okay, thanks. Got one from Brad Vickery at USA Alliance. This is to Laurie and Pat. Have you seen and agreed to the savings template amounts for the various failures and savings elements that Exelon is sharing?
We have not. We only because we're not there yet. We had our first failure, but I still have to work with my management and see how they want to evaluate and tally the failures.
In terms of, we have not adapted that either. However, the number of failures, or I could like to call them cost avoidances, when you're looking at 10 to 11 potential reactor scrams across your fleet, it's not a hard sell to say that we think we've saved some money. That's pretty much all I've got.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And it kind of drives into the next question for you, Dave, here. How does cost to implement and operate compare against cost savings achieved with an established PQ program?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I've been asked that question since 2006. There is a cost, obviously, to implement the program. There's a cost to test components, and we would get when we developed at Exelon, when I was at Exelon, every year, the budget folks would come to us saying, is this really justified? And that's why you have to celebrate the successes and show where the test failure avoided the issue. Now, as for cost, if you're talking about a down power or a scram, if you avoid a scram, so if you're at South Texas today, and in the state of Texas, everything we're reading about the news and the cost of power in Texas this week, they came offline. Their unit 1 came offline, I think on Monday or whatever day it was. They're ramping back up, but I think it was a feed water sensor. Now I don't know if that would have been included on PQI. That would be interesting to pull that string. But if you have one of those success stories, fill in the blank for how much it cost at your plant to be offline for 24 or 48 hours. The cost of testing that part is insignificant compared to that cost, and you can all fill in the blank. So the cost of the program, we would provide that yearly report to Exelon, and it was pretty substantial. Going back, you don't have to go back, Matt, but the generation loss has been 2.5 million hours, and you can imagine you multiply that out times the cost of money. If you can prevent just a percentage of those, it adds up to real money. So, and if it's the heat of summer or the coldest days in Texas ever, timing is everything. I always, failures always happened on Friday afternoon for me. They never happen, first thing Monday morning when you walk in the door. So.
That's right.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to add, when the program is up and running and you've completed all of your testing of your existing inventory, that warranty, when you're sending something off and it fails, you can go back directly to your supplier and say, hey, this part didn't work, instead of not knowing and put it on your shelves and finding out later where you have no recourse. So there are savings there as well.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Pat. I'm glad you brought that up. And if once the program evolves and you're testing during receipt, and you get a failure, you can return that to the vendor. And if you provide the reason why, they should give you a credit and provide a new part. And there's a pretty tremendous cost savings right there. At Exelon, I've been burnt a number of times where you had a failure that they just put in. You get all excited, you get the serial number, you call up the vendor and say, I had a failure here, you're all upset, and they come back and they say, well, Dave, I saw that to you 10 years ago, go away. And you're not going to get any attention after a part, after they sold the part, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So testing during receipt is an immediate cost savings there. So great comment, Pat. Thanks. Anybody else?
That looks like it.
Well, I think we're coming up on our 1 hour here, so we sure appreciate everybody. We'll be sending out the presentation And you have the contact information for Matt and myself. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us.
Yeah, again, I just want to thank, Pat and Laurie for joining us. Really appreciate your input. Very, very helpful, very informative. So thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us. And, if anybody on the call has any questions or comments that we can, help with, feel free to reach out, as Dave said, to him or myself.